president supports this plan. It's a good plan for both Russia and Ukraine.
If Kiev does not want to discuss President Trump's proposals and refuses to do so,
the war can only end with the consent of Ukraine and of Europe.
I thought they should have acted quicker, but it's a cold winter and a lot of the...
On the Washington-Brussels axis, one of history's biggest diplomatic crises erupted not quietly, but with a bang. There is a peace plan on the table, but European allies see it not as peace, but as surrender. London to Berlin, Paris to Warsaw, European leaders are triggering their strategic autonomy reflexes more forcefully than ever in response to these provisions, which were shaped without consulting them and directly affect the continent's security. At the epicenter of this diplomatic earthquake is a 28-point draft text, details of which were shared by Axios, allegedly resulting from talks between White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and his Russian counterpart, Kirill Dmitriev. Contrary to diplomatic norms, this text, which is said to have been developed without the direct involvement of European Union officials or even Kiev, is seen as a reflection of the quick fix doctrine. However, what alarms European foreign ministers and strategists is not so much the existence of the plan as the specific technical and economic details it contains. Let's take a closer look at those critical points that have created a cold shower effect in the corridors of Brussels, with the meticulousness of an OSINT analyst. First, the collapse of the defense doctrine, Articles 6 and 8. In terms of security, two articles stand out that contradict Europe's principle of deterrence. Article 6 proposes limiting the Ukrainian army's personnel to 600,000. According to European Security Council experts, demanding that the attacked party, the victim, reduce its army would leave Europe's eastern flank vulnerable to a possible future Russian move. Estonian Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Marko Mikkelson's warning that, if Ukraine accepts this, there will be no Ukraine left, sums up the existential concern this clause has created in the Baltic states. Added to this, Article 8 prohibits the deployment of NATO troops in Ukraine. However, while the UK and France are planning a peacekeeping force or training missions after the ceasefire, this article makes Europe's plans for a physical presence on the ground legally impossible. Second, sovereignty crisis, Article 9 and Poland's reaction. Perhaps the moment when diplomatic courtesy was most strained came with the emergence of the article concerning Poland. Article 9 states that European warplanes will be deployed in Poland. However, the problem is that, according to statements by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, Warsaw was not consulted on this matter beforehand. Tusk's statement that Poles make decisions about Poland, nothing happens about us without us, is proof that the 28-point plan challenges not only Ukraine, but also the sovereignty of NATO's most loyal members. When the divergence in vision between Brussels and Washington became clear, an unexpected action reflex was triggered in European capitals instead of the expected acceptance. Diplomatic sources indicate that Europe is preparing to implement its Plan B. This is no longer just about supporting Ukraine, but an attempt to build Europe's own defense shield independently of Washington. The preparation for deployment by London and Paris was the first response. According to Bloomberg reports, the UK has put forward a plan to send troops to Ukraine immediately after the ceasefire. This move is a direct challenge to the no NATO troops rule proposed by Washington in Article 8. The Reinsurance Force, developed under the leadership of Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, an effort to prove that Europe can be a deterrent force against Russia on the ground, even without American guarantees. According to Le Figaro, this force is not only for training purposes, but also has the potential to secure a possible ceasefire line. Germany's coordination efforts and quiet diplomacy are also noteworthy. Chancellor Friedrich Merz is pursuing a more diplomatic but determined line. Merz's message to Zelenskyy during their talks that no agreement can be valid without Europe's approval shows that Berlin is trying to establish a correction mechanism that will protect Europe's interests without burning bridges with Washington. German officials know that the American plan is part of a strategy to put pressure on everyone at the same time, and are trying to maintain European unity in response. Meanwhile, the Black Sea equation and Turkey's critical role are again noteworthy. In this new security architecture, Turkey's role is also gaining strategic importance. The UK's talks to expand the Black Sea Group with Turkey, Romania and Bulgaria for mine clearance and open sea security make Ankara, the guardian of the Montreux Convention, a key actor. Poland and the Baltic states are taking the hardest line. Donald Tusk's call that Russia wants to weaken us, we cannot allow ourselves to be divided, and increased security measures against railway sabotage show that this bloc firmly rejects Washington's conciliatory stance. Former US Ambassador to the EU Anthony Gardner also criticized this situation, saying, "This administration actually wants to destroy the EU. It is an aggressor that is losing territory and disarming," validating Europe's concerns. So what are the circumstances that lead to Europe not aligning with Washington's vision and believing that Russia is not sincere? At the root of the vision gap between Washington and Brussels lies not the items on paper, but the frightening reality beneath and above the surface. For Washington, Russia is a state with which to negotiate. For Europe, Russia is an active threat, with spy ships disguised as fishing boats in the North Sea, GPS jammers threatening civilian flights in the Baltic, and provocateurs pointing lasers at British pilots. Europe must cut its own Gordian knot, because the threat has now gone beyond the scale of a proxy war and is directly touching the continent's nerve endings. The nightmare of the shadow fleet in the Baltic is the most critical reason. Despite the decline in Russian oil exports pointed out by EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, Russia's shadow fleet roams international waters like a ghost. Composed of uninsured, neglected and aging tankers, this fleet not only circumvents sanctions, but also serves as a hybrid weapon by potentially causing an environmental disaster off the coasts of Baltic countries or by transporting military equipment. The pirate doctrine in the North Sea is one of the most important reasons for this. Lasers and espionage. According to Bloomberg reports, the UK's plan to send troops to Ukraine is actually part of a much broader defence reflex. British Royal Air Force (RAF) pilots being subjected to laser harassment from Russian ships during routine patrols over the North Sea and reckless maneuvers that put civil aviation at risk have established the perception in London that diplomacy is over, deterrence is essential. Russia's spy fleet, disguised as research vessels, mapping the North Sea's energy infrastructure and circling wind turbines and data cables, is rehearsing an apocalypse scenario that could cut off Europe's internet and electricity. The Reinsurance Force that Britain and France are trying to establish is a practical response to this physical threat, countering Washington's "no troops" Article 8 dictate. Now for the third critical article, the geo-economic equation. Article 14 and financial burden sharing. Perhaps the biggest debate centers on Article 14, which deals with the management of money and assets. According to the draft, the management of approximately $300 billion in Russian assets frozen in the West is evolving into a structure completely different from the compensation credit model previously devised by Europe. According to the plan, a $100 billion portion will be transferred to a reconstruction fund to be established under US leadership. However, the critical sentence in the text that drew the reaction of European diplomats is, "The US will take 50% of the profits from this initiative." This article is being read in European capitals as follows. The risk remains largely with Euroclear, based in Belgium, where the assets are held, and with the European legal system, while the Financial Returns and Management Initiative are shifting to the other side of the Atlantic. The fact that senior European diplomats speaking to Politico described this as an approach that could undermine Europe's efforts, and that a senior official criticized the situation with the analogy, "Witkoff needs a psychiatrist," shows how high tensions are running. For Europe, this is not just a matter of money. It means the risk that Russia, without paying war reparations, could see part of its assets turned into an investment vehicle and returned into the system. Fourth, Russia's position, a strategic victory? Signals from the Kremlin confirm that Moscow views this plan as negotiable ground. Putin's urgent convening of the Security Council and his statement that Ukraine and Europe are still dreaming of strategic defeat show that Russia sees these 28 points as an opportunity to turn its military gains on the ground into a diplomatic victory. The plan's inclusion of Russia's return to the G8 and its integration into the global economy, Article 13, means circumventing sanctions for Moscow, which is the exact opposite of Europe's strategy of weakening Russia. This diplomatic crisis is not just a debate about where Ukraine's borders should lie. It is a fundamental shake-up of the transatlantic security architecture that has held the Western world together since 1945. EU Foreign Affairs representative Kaja Kallas's words, "The pressure should be on the aggressor, not the victim," are not just a moral stance, but the realpolitik reality of Europe. If the 28-point plan is implemented as it stands, Europe will find itself in three major strategic traps. First, the security trap. Russia retaining control of part of the occupied territories, example as a buffer zone, bordering a Ukraine with a reduced army and deprived of NATO guarantees, would be a victory for Putin's grey zone strategy. According to European strategists, Russia's next target in this scenario would be the Baltics or Moldova, using hybrid warfare methods. Second, financial trap. The model proposed in Article 14 obliges European taxpayers to pay for the destruction caused by Russia while rehabilitating Russia's economic system. This means the failure of the EU's aggressor pays principle. Legal risks on Belgium and Euroclear could lock up the European financial system in years of litigation. Third, political trap. Washington's attempt to bypass Europe and seek a direct agreement with Moscow calls into question the EU's weight as a geopolitical actor. The outcry that decisions cannot be made about us without us is an attempt to buy Europe's place at the table. However, as a US official told Axios, Washington sees this plan as difficult but necessary for Ukraine, while Europe sees it as suicide for Ukraine and a threat to Europe. This entire picture is pushing Europe toward an inevitable conclusion: armament. Germany's plans to increase its defense budget, France's nuclear deterrence rhetoric, and Britain's mobilization preparations are no longer a choice, but a necessity. In a world where Washington's security umbrella has become conditional, Europe must build its own. Paradoxically, the US selling its military weapons to Europe appears to be a solution to the Europeans' efforts to increase defense spending. November 2025 marks a watershed moment for the Western alliance. The 28 items on the table may appear to be a peace plan on paper, but between the lines, it is a manifesto declaring Europe's isolation. While Washington pursues a pragmatic deal, Brussels, Warsaw, and London face the threat at their doorstep. Volodymyr Zelensky's dilemma of honor or alliance is actually the dilemma of all of Europe. If Europe accepts this plan without dictating its own security conditions, it will have mortgaged not only Ukraine's future, but its own. History shows us this. Concessions made to appease the aggressor do not bring peace. They only make the next war bloodier. And it seems that Europe remembers this lesson from 1939 very well and is preparing to say no this time. The peace table has been set, but the chairs are not yet filled. And who sits in those chairs will determine how harsh the coming winter will be. Thank you for choosing us.